The small woman with the quiet gaze was labeled dead weight the moment training began. She can't even lift a rucksack and she wants to shoot. Laughter echoed across the base. No one cared to ask her name until a joking officer pulled up her sleeve and the room went silent. Tattooed on her left wrist, Kel 13. Minutes later, a military helicopter descended from the sky. A general stepped out and said, "Whoever bears this code answers only to me." Sarah Mitchell stood there, her soft brown hair loose catching the wind as the chopper blades slowed. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. Her faded uniform hung a little too big on her frame, like it had been handed down from someone else. The recruits around her, big guys with buzz cuts, women with tight ponytails, kept their eyes on the ground. They'd been laughing just minutes ago. Now nobody said a word. The general's boots crunched on the gravel as he walked off, leaving Sarah alone in the center of the training yard. She adjusted her sleeve covering the tattoo again and turned back to the barracks. Her face gave nothing away, but the air had changed. It was heavier now, like the whole base was holding its breath. Before we go further, can you do me a quick favor? Grab your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to keep sharing stories like this. Stories about people who get counted out but keep standing tall. All right, let's get back to Sarah. The first day at the NATO training camp had been brutal for her. The place was a fortress of concrete and steel, tucked in a valley where the wind howled at night. Elite recruits from across the world filled the ranks. Men who'd run marathons in full gear. Women who could dismantle a rifle blindfolded. And then there was Sarah, assigned to the lowest ranked squad, the group everyone called the leftovers. Nobody knew how she'd gotten in. No paperwork, no reputation, just a name on a roster and a bunk in the corner. The squad leader, a guy named Carter, with a jaw like a brick, didn't even look at her when he barked orders. "Stay out of the way, Mitchell," he said, tossing her a water canteen like it was charity. In the first week during a logistics drill, Sarah faced a new kind of cruelty. The squad was tasked with unloading supply crates under a tight deadline. Sarah worked quietly, stacking boxes with steady hands. A recruit named Donovan, broad-shouldered with a constant sneer, deliberately shoved a crate into her path, making her stumble. "Watch that charity case," he said, his voice loud enough to draw eyes. "You're slowing us down with those noodle arms." The others laughed, and a woman named Claire with a sharp bob and sharper tongue joined in. "Maybe she's here to carry our coffee instead," she said, miming a waitress balancing a tray. Donovan grabbed Sarah's crate and dumped its contents, bandages, and rations into the dirt. "Oops. Clean that up, princess." Sarah knelt, gathering the supplies, her face unreadable. Her fingers moved methodically, but her shoulders tensed, a silent signal of the storm she held back. During the first physical drill, things got worse. The squad had to haul 40 lb packs across a muddy field, climbing ropes and crawling under barbed wire. Sarah lagged behind, her boots sinking into the sludge. A recruit named Jensen Tall, with a smirk that never quit, jogged past her. "Let her sit this one out," he called to Carter. "She might sprain a nail." The others laughed, their voices carrying over the sound of boots pounding dirt. A woman named Riley, who wore her hair in a sleek braid and always smelled like expensive lotion, muttered just loud enough for Sarah to hear, "Why does the Army even accept trash like her?" Sarah kept moving, her eyes fixed on the ground. She didn't answer, didn't even look up, but her hands tightened around the straps of her pack. In a rare moment of downtime, Sarah's quiet confidence surfaced. The squad was gathered around a broken radio, its static drowning out any signal. Recruits fumbled with wires, cursing under their breath. Sarah stepped forward, her hands steady as she unscrewed the casing. In under a minute, she'd reconnected a loose circuit, and the radio crackled to life, broadcasting clear coordinates. A grizzled instructor named Watts, who'd been watching, raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you learn that, Mitchell?" he asked, his tone more curious than kind. Sarah shrugged, wiping her hands on her pants. "Just picked it up," she said. Watts nodded, but his gaze lingered, like he'd seen something the others hadn't. As Sarah walked away, Jensen muttered, "Lucky guess." But Watts shot him a look that shut him up. At dinner that night, the mess hall was loud, clanging trays, shouting the smell of overcooked stew. Sarah sat alone at the end of a table, her plate barely touched. Across the room, Jensen leaned over to his buddies, pointing at her. "Look at that uniform," he said loud enough to cut through the noise. "Did she pull it out of a dumpster? More laughter. Hanamaidawar, Riley, sitting nearby, added, maybe she's here on a dare. You know, like a bet. A guy named Torres, who always wore a gold chain under his shirt, leaned back in his chair. Nah, she's just lost. Somebody tell her the typing pool's down the road. The table erupted. Sarah's fork paused over her plate. She set it down, folded her hands in her lap, and stared straight ahead. Not a word, not a glance. But the way she sat, spine-straight shoulders, still made the air around her feel like it could snap. During a medical training session, the bullying turned vicious. The squad was practicing field triage, pairing up to bandage mock wounds. Sarah was left without a partner, standing by a table of gauze and splints. A recruit named Meredith, with a fake smile and a habit of gossip, saw her chance. "Oh, look, it's Nurse Nobody," she said, tossing a roll of bandages at Sarah's feet. "Bet you can't even tie a knot without crying." The room chuckled as Meredith grabbed a mannequin and smeared fake blood on its arm. "Here, fix this." Are you too delicate for gore?" she said, shoving the mannequin towards Sarah, who caught it before it fell. The others joined in chanting, "Nurse Nobody, Nurse Nobody." Sarah steadied the mannequin, her hands moving fast to wrap the wound perfectly. She didn't look at Meredith, but her jaw clenched, and the bandage was tied so tightly it nearly snapped. The next morning, during a simulated operation, something shifted. The squad was sent on a night march, navigating a forest with handheld GPS units. The lead scout, a guy named Walsh with a scar across his eyebrow, was cocky, barking coordinates like he owned the place. Sarah trailed at the back, her flashlight dim. Halfway through, she stopped, her head tilting as she glanced at Walsh's screen. "You're walking straight into a radar trap," she whispered, her voice so soft it barely carried. Walsh spun around, his face red. "What did you say, Deadweight?" he snapped. "You think you know better than me?" The others snickered, but Sarah didn't back down. She pointed at the blinking dot on his GPS. "That's an enemy frequency. Check it." Walsh laughed until the screen flashed red, an alert screaming they'd been detected. The commander's voice crackled over the radio. "Abort! Back to base!" The squad froze, their eyes darting to Sarah. The commander stormed over later, his face like stone. "Who spotted that?" he demanded. Nobody answered. But Carter, standing nearby, glanced at Sarah, his jaw tight. During a night patrol exercise, Sarah's instincts saved the day again. The squad was tasked with securing a perimeter in total darkness, relying on night vision goggles. A faint rustle in the bushes set everyone on edge, but Walsh dismissed it as wildlife. Sarah, scanning the area, noticed a glint of metal, a hidden tripwire. She grabbed Walsh's arm, pulling him back just as he stepped forward. "It's rigged," she said, her voice low. The squad froze as she knelt, tracing the wire to a mock explosive. The instructor, a stern woman named Holt, confirmed it. "That would have taken out half your team," she set, her eyes on Sarah. "Good catch, Mitchell." The others shifted uncomfortably, their bravado gone. Walsh muttered something under his breath, but Holt's glare silenced him. Sarah stood brushing dirt off her knees, her face as calm as ever. Back at the barracks, the mood was sour. Walsh slammed his gear down, muttering about dumb luck. Riley rolled her eyes, brushing past Sarah. "Don't get cocky, Mitchell," she said. "One fluke doesn't make you a soldier." Sarah didn't respond. She sat on her bunk, unlacing her boots, her movements slow and deliberate, but her eyes flicked to the window where the forest loomed dark and quiet. For a second, her fingers brushed the sleeve over her tattoo like she was checking it was still hidden. Nobody noticed. Nobody except Lieutenant Colonel Harrow, who'd been watching from the doorway. He didn't say anything, just scribbled something in a notebook and walked away. The following week, during a map-reading exercise, the harassment escalated. The squad was spread out in a field, plotting coordinates under a gray sky. Sarah stood alone, her map folded neatly, her pencil marking precise points. A recruit named Gavin, with a loud voice and a cruel streak, spotted her. "Hey, look, it's the Seagrapher," he shouted, snatching her map and tearing it in half. "What's this, your treasure map to nowhere?" The others laughed as he tossed the pieces into the wind. Claire, standing nearby, added, "She probably thinks she's Columbus, lost and useless." Gavin stepped closer, towering over Sarah. "Go fetch your map, Deadweight. Maybe it'll teach you to stay in your lane." Sarah watched the scraps flutter away, her hands still. Then she pulled a spare map from her pocket, unfolded it, and kept working. Her silence was louder than their taunts. A few days later, during a weapons check, the tension boiled over. The squad was lined up rifles on the table as an officer named Bragg moved down the row. He was a short guy, all bluster with a voice that carried like a foghorn. When he got to Sarah, he stopped, his eyes narrowing. "Why you always covering that wrist, Mitchell?" he barked. Before she could answer, he grabbed her arm and yanked up her sleeve. The tattoo gleamed under the fluorescent lights, Kelron stark and black against her pale skin. The room went quiet for a split second, then exploded. Jensen let out a howl. "You fake that in a tattoo shop," he said, doubling over. Riley smirked, crossing her arms. "Probably some emo phase from high school." Even Bragg chuckled, shaking his head. "I've seen military codes for 20 years, he said. "That one's garbage." Sarah pulled her arm back, her face blank. But her eyes locked on Bragg's just for a moment, and he stopped laughing. "Get back in line," he muttered, turning away. During a tactical briefing, Sarah's hidden expertise emerged. The squad was analyzing a complex urban assault plan with diagrams projected on a screen. The instructor, a man named Reed, was struggling to explain a flaw in the approach. Sarah, standing at the back, raised her hand in an unusual move. "Your flank's exposed on the east side," she said, her voice steady. "You need a decoy to draw fire." Reed frowned but checked the plan. His eyes widened. "She's right," he said, adjusting the diagram. The room went quiet, the recruits exchanging glances. Reed turned to Sarah. "How'd you see that?" She shrugged her fingers, tapping the edge of her sleeve. "It's obvious if you look." Reed nodded, but his expression shifted like he was seeing her for the first time. The others didn't laugh, but their silence carried a new weight. That night, Harrow couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, a single lamp casting shadows on the wall. He'd seen the tattoo. He'd heard the code KLL-13. It tugged at something buried deep, something he hadn't thought about in years. He pulled out an old encrypted file from a locked drawer, his hands shaking as he typed in the access code. The screen flickered, and there it was. Ghost Viper 013, Mitchell S. Kill Count 208. A grainy photo of a younger Sarah stared back at him, her eyes just as steady, just as unreadable. "She disappeared 4 years ago," he whispered to himself. He leaned back in his chair, his face pale. "Who are you, really?" The next morning, he watched her from across the training yard, his coffee untouched. Sarah didn't notice. She was too busy tying her boots, her fingers quick and precise, like she'd done it 1,000 times in the dark. The live fire drills were when things started to crack. The squad was out on the range, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder. Sarah was handed the easiest target, a stationary silhouette at 50 yards. Carter, standing nearby, didn't even look at her. "Just don't shoot your foot off Mitchell," he said, walking away. The others lined up their rifles, cracking as they hit their marks. Sarah stepped to the line, her movements quiet, almost too smooth. But then Jensen, showing off, stumbled into her lane, knocking her aim off. Her shot went wide, pinging off a metal pole. The range erupted in laughter. Jensen grinned, pulling a marker from his pocket. "Let me add a 0, he said, grabbing her wrist and scribbling on her sleeve. 013D. A perfect round number for a perfect 0. The others hooted, clapping him on the back. Sarah stepped back, her eyes cold sharp like a blade sliding out of its sheath. She didn't say a word, just wiped the ink off with her thumb and turned back to the target. During a messal cleanup, the bullying took a personal turn. Sarah was assigned to scrub pots, her sleeves rolled up, her tattoo briefly visible. A recruit named Ellis with a chipped tooth and a mean streak noticed. He grabbed a ladle and banged it against a pot, drawing everyone's attention. "Hey everybody, check out the art show," he shouted, pointing at Sarah's wrist. "What's Cal, were you? Wah, your body count from a bad Tinder date." The room roared. Meredith, wiping down tables, added, "Maybe it's her score in Call of Duty. 0 kills all deaths." Error. Ellis tossed a greasy rag at Sarah, hitting her in the chest. "Cover that up, wannabe. It's embarrassing." Sarah caught the rag before it fell, folding it neatly and setting it aside. Her eyes met Ellis's for a split second, and he flinched, though he tried to hide it. That afternoon, the camp got a surprise. A sniper trial meant only for the best of the best. 5 moving targets, high speed at varying distances. The kind of test that separated veterans from rookies. The general himself, a man named Brooks with a chest full of medals, stood at the edge of the range watching. The recruits buzzed with excitement, except Sarah, who stood at the back, her rifle slung over her shoulder. Carter smirked. "This ain't for you, Deadweight." he said. But Sarah stepped forward, her boots quiet on the gravel. The others chuckled, nudging each other. She's going to embarrass herself, Riley whispered. Sarah loaded her rifle, her hands steady. She breathed once, deep and slow, then crack, 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 crack. 5 shots, 5 bull's eyes, 6 seconds flat. The range went silent. Brooks walked down his face, unreadable. He lifted Sarah's wrist, saw the tattoo, and froze. Kel War 3, he muttered. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, someone looked at her like they knew exactly who she was. In a quiet moment after the trial, an old instructor named Grayson approached Sarah. He'd been retired but was called in to observe the sniper test. As Sarah cleaned her rifle, he sat beside her, his hands weathered from years in the field. I knew a Viper once, he said, his voice low. Same look in her eyes, same coat on her wrist. Sarah didn't respond, but her hands paused, the rag still. Grayson pulled a faded dog tag from his pocket, engraved with a single number, 7. She saved my unit in Fallujah. Never got her name. He set the tag on the bench and walked away. Sarah stared at it, her fingers brushing the metal, then slipped it into her pocket. Nobody saw, but the weight of that moment hung in the air. The whispers started that night in the barracks, in the mess hall, in the dark corners of the base. 5 shots in 6 seconds, Torres said, shaking his head. Nobody does that. Riley, who'd been quiet all evening, slammed her tray down. It's a fluke, she snapped. She's nobody. But the doubt was there, creeping in like fog. Jensen wasn't laughing anymore. He kept glancing at Sarah, who sat alone, cleaning her rifle with a rag. Her movements were precise, almost mechanical, but her face was calm again, like nothing had happened. Harrow, standing in the shadows, watched her too. He'd shown Brooks the file. They'd talked in low voices, doors locked. If she's really Era 113, Brooks had said, why is she here? And why is she hiding? Harrow didn't have an answer. But he noticed something new. Sarah's bunk was neater than the others, her gear arranged like she could grab it and vanish in seconds. During a group photo session for the camp's records, the cruelty resurfaced. The squad lined up dressed in clean uniforms while a photographer adjusted his lens. Sarah stood at the edge, her faded gear out of place among the polished ranks. Donovan, standing nearby, nudged Claire. Get her out of the shot, he said loud enough for all to hear. She's ruining the vibe. Claire smirked and stepped in front of Sarah, blocking her from view. Sorry, Mitchell. This is for real soldiers, she said, her voice sugary but sharp. The photographer hesitated, but Donovan waved him on. Take it now. She doesn't belong. The squad laughed as the shutter clicked, leaving Sarah out. She stepped back, her hands in her pockets, her face blank, but her fingers curled around something small, a black tag she hadn't shown anyone. A week later, the final blow came. Lucas, a wiry recruit with a chip on his shoulder, had been digging. He'd always hated Sarah ever since she'd outshot him in a practice drill. He'd gone to the records office, bribed a clerk, and come back with a printed sheet. During a break in training, he stood up in the middle of the yard, waving it like a flag. This is fake, he shouted. I found her file. No military history, no clearance. She's probably a spy, the others gathered, murmuring. Lucas stormed over to Sarah, who was sitting on a crate drinking from a canteen. He ripped the name badge off her uniform, tearing the fabric. We don't recognize you, he said, spitting the words. The crowd went quiet. Sarah looked at him, her eyes steady. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black tag no bigger than a coin. She dropped it to the ground. It landed with a soft clink. A ghost unit command token, the kind only a handful of people in the world were authorized to carry. The air sucked out of the yard. Lucas stepped back, his face pale. Nobody moved. The next morning, the base was different, tighter, quieter. Recruits kept their heads down, their jokes gone. Sarah walked to the training field like always, her boots scuffing the dirt. But now people stepped aside. Not out of respect, out of something else. Fear, maybe. Or guilt. During roll call, Carter called her name, last, his voice softer than before. Mitchell, he said, and his eyes flicked to her wrist. She nodded just once and took her place. Riley, standing nearby, didn't look at her. Jensen kept his distance, his smirk gone. Torres, who'd been so loud in the Masal, was suddenly obsessed with polishing his boots. Only Harrow watched her openly, now his notebook tucked away. He'd stopped writing about her. He didn't need to anymore. Then it happened. Just after noon, the sound came, a low thumping roar in the sky. A black military helicopter crested the valley, its blades slicing the air. Recruits stopped mid-drill, shielding their eyes against the dust. The chopper touched down in the middle of the field, kicking up gravel. A man stepped out, his uniform crisp, his face hard. General Hamilton, commander of special operations. He carried a sealed directive, the kind that shut down bases and started wars. He didn't look at the recruits, didn't look at the officers. His eyes found Sarah standing alone at the edge of the field. "Kelleron," he said, his voice cutting through the wind. "You are hereby recalled. As of now, this base is under your command." He turned to the crowd, his gaze like steel. "Anyone who disrespects her, your names will be filed at the ministry." Sarah didn't move, didn't speak. She just adjusted her sleeve, covering the tattoo, and walked toward the chopper. Lucas, standing nearby, dropped to his knees, his hands shaking. Nobody helped him up. As the chopper's roar faded, a young lieutenant named Perry stepped forward, his face pale but determined. He'd been silent through the camp, a bookish type who kept to himself. He held a crumpled letter, its edges worn. "Mitchell," he called, his voice shaking. "I found this in the archives. It's from a mission in Syria. Ghost Viper 013 saved my brother's unit. Dorotino." The crowd turned, their whispers dying. Perry's hands trembled as he read aloud. "She carried 2 wounded men through a minefield. Never asked for a medal." Sarah paused, her hand on the chopper door. She looked at Perry, her eyes softening for the first time. "Tell him to stay safe," she said, then climbed aboard. Perry clutched the letter, his shoulders straighter, as the chopper lifted off. The fallout was quiet but real. Lucas was gone by the next day, transferred out, his record marked, "Nobody knew where, and nobody asked." Riley's social media, where she'd posted a snarky comment about the wannabe soldier, went dark after a screenshot went viral. She lost her sponsorship with a tactical gear brand. Her DMs flooded with messages calling her out. Jensen, who'd been so quick with the marker, was passed over for a promotion. His buddies stopped sitting with him in the Masal. Torres, who'd laughed the loudest, got a call from his CEO. His family's business, which relied on military contracts, was suddenly under review. Donovan's application for an elite unit was rejected. His name flagged for conduct issues. Claire was dropped from a prestigious training program, her file citing lack of teamwork. Meredith's family, who'd boasted about her military career, stopped mentioning her at gatherings. Ellis was reassigned to a remote outpost, his dreams of glory gone. Gavin faced a formal inquiry for damaging equipment. His career stalled. Nobody gloated. Nobody had to. Sarah didn't stay long. She was gone within the week. Her bunk empty, her gear cleared out. The base felt hollow without her, like it had lost something nobody could name. Harrow found a note on his desk, just one line in her neat slanted handwriting. "Keep the file locked." He burned it that night, the ashes scattering in the wind. Brooks, the general, never spoke of her again. But sometimes late at night, he'd pull out an old photo from his wallet, a group of Ghost Vipers years ago, with a young woman in the back, her eyes steady, her wrist bare. He'd look at it, then tuck it away. Years later, some of the recruits would talk about her, not often and never for long. They'd remember the way she stood, the way she moved, the way her silence said more than their shouting ever could. They'd remember the tattoo, the helicopter, the general's voice. And they'd wonder, where was she now? What was she doing? But they knew better than to ask. People like Sarah didn't leave traces, they just left lessons. She wasn't what they thought. She wasn't weak, wasn't lost, wasn't deadweight. She was something else, something they'd never understand. And in the end, she didn't need their respect. She'd carried her truth all along, etched in ink and silence. They judged her, mocked her, tried to break her, but they were the ones who fell, and she just kept walking.